The guild bell pretends it can bless childbirth from a rooftop, so you set the horn lamp on a splintered bench beside St. Mary's Lane until a warm coin of light lands where water, cloth, rumor, and breath must agree, or Krakow will let headlines about leprosy write your name before any infant learns theirs. The governor's dyer has posted quarantine orders in a hand that smells of indigo. The alderman's clerk rehearses Latin shaped like mercy but priced like linen. A parish beadle strokes a staff the way people touch sentences they want to become true. The midwives row, buckets, knives, bread, swaddles, gossip priced in comfort, looks ordinary at 20 paces and like a trial at 2. They say the leprosaria at Casimir's has filled again, that St. Leonard's hermits saw a woman drop a swaddled child at dawn and run as if touched by angels or fines. Suspect contact, the clerk intones, and you, midwife by oath, resident by rumor, apprentice to the old art of catching life on a floor that refuses to be polite, must turn that phrase into a street that does not lie to itself. Rope makes the street do its job. You square the mouth of the lane because ankles obey what sermons forget, and you nail counsel at mouth height where wrists must bruise before mouths volunteer thunder. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised, no crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present. The quarter-glass girl, your niece who believes minutes will save more children than prayers, flips her sand. The sisters of warmth, bathers and herb women who bully kettles for a living, drag their copper under your rope and scald superstition into service. If we are going to be judged, the lane will be an instrument and not a rumor. Leprosy is not childbirth's cousin, but men who don't bleed choose cousins for you. A friar explains how touch corrupts. A city doctor, who cannot find the street on his own map without a sexton's help, names your hands a vehicle between contagion and innocence. The beadle suggests your bucket is ambitious. You do not argue theology, you count minutes between pulses. Fever first is your stool beneath the shutter, where cheeks confess faster than tongues. Wash before rumor denies a chorus the breath it rents from mothers. Knife scalded turns a threat into a tool. Linen aired keeps the floor from remembering yesterday. Swaddles rinsed unlearns an accusation before it learns to rhyme. The first call comes from a courtyard that has not yet learned the price of observation. A girl's water has broken under a sky that rehearses rain and absolution interchangeably. The grandmother lists saints and uncles in the same sentence. The father's hands speak to his belt like a confession. A cousin mutters leper father because he needs a reason to feel more useful than his patience permits. Witness heard sits the cousin on the barrel and teaches him silence by task. Door unbarred lets women carry without performing bravery. No crowd at bed keeps the room from hiring an audience for indecision. Oath copied makes you repeat out loud what your hands already know. Mother watched, cord tied, knife scalded, child warmed, skin examined, eyes opened to learn something more interesting than guilt. Officials arrive in the door like new weather. The alderman's clerk reads the clause that allows an inspection. The parish beadle, who learned to enjoy your rope during last winter's fever, holds it aside with a tenderness he does not show to people. Charter read aloud returns power to its page. The Sisters of Warmth set a basin where glances must wash before they can become words. Wash before coin makes an argument behave. The clerk changes his mind about what sentence he wanted to write on this house. You blot his ink with your apron and pretend you meant to curtsy. Krakow's rumor does not walk, it rides bells. St. Mary's Tower speaks in phrasing you have memorized since childhood, and you wonder whether sound carries blame in its saddle. The lane answers with kettles. Your rules are not laws, they are elbows that make carrying cheaper than chorus. A neighbor, afraid since the leprosarium took her sister last year, holds up a strip of linen like an indulgence. Swaddles rinsed gives her something better to hold up, the weight of her own participation. She claps once, which is how practical people sing. Not every birth you are summoned to remains legal in the eyes of men who take their duty from pages. The second call discovers you at the edge of Kazimierz, where the leper bells live across the ditch. The woman is branded by rumor because her husband burned at a quarry and her neighbor turned his grief into a catalog. Your feet find the steps without asking your pride to help. Rope does the rest. No crowd at bed prevents pity from rehearsing cruelty. Window latched tells the wind to mind its own seat. Knife scalded is a quick liturgy. Oath copied is a longer one. Palate raised persuades blood to remember gravity is polite. The child arrives under a sky that quits trying to be doctrine. The mother laughs like a treaty. You speak to the beadle on the way out and give him something you refuse to call permission. Your list, nailed where he will have to touch it. Midwives carry more than babies. They carry calendars, and calendars are always political. The governor's dyer posts a second notice. Any house receiving a midwife during suspected contact must hang a sign and submit the midwife to inspection at St. Leonard's Yard by Prime. The Sisters of Warmth read it and snort like copper cooling. Fees displayed, taxes, sentences into buckets. Thanks. Before charges posts names of women who carried water before men wrote anything down about it. The city changes shape by the hour, and your rope does not care who claims responsibility as long as elbows speak before paragraphs. You step toward the lens because our square today includes your scrolling hand. If you want more alleys where rinsed minutes outrank rumors, subscribe and tap the bell. the practical one, not the theatrical one. So part 2 lands while your wrists still remember how to talk to wood and water. In the comments, give me your 7-word birthing rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and tell me what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to St. Leonard's Gate before Vespers. The third call reminds you why cities fear your trade more than plague. A merchant's mistress is told to confess before she labors. His wife is told to forgive before she remembers. The priest is told to absolve before he hears. And you are told to make everything fit in a basin you can carry at speed. Witness heard steals everyone's stage. Door unbarred receives even the man who thought he purchased invisibility. Wash before rumor denies him a power he has relied on since the price of candles included silence. The child arrives reluctant to become a symbol. You facilitate their privacy by doing your job. Swaddles rinsed, linen aired, palate raised. The priest looks less theatrical with sleeves rolled. The wife looks more human with water on her cheek. The mistress looks like a person keeping a promise to a person smaller than anyone else's vanity. The child arrives reluctant to become a symbol. You facilitate their privacy by doing your job. Swaddles rinsed, linen aired, palate raised. The priest looks less theatrical with sleeves rolled. The wife looks more human with water on her cheek. The mistress looks like a person keeping a promise to a person smaller than anyone else's vanity. St. Leonard's Yard waits for you by dawn, like a poem that wants to be a receipt. Inspectors copy your hands with their eyes. Leper bell ropes sway like arguments you cannot afford to lose. Oath copied becomes your defense faster than outrage. Fever first keeps strangers' curiosity from trying to rename your work. A woman across the ditch who learned to braid palm leaves into courage last Lent carries you a jug and a proverb. Skin is not destiny, but behavior is. You add her name to thanks above the alderman's clerks because priority belongs to those who turn fear into chores. The greatest test comes from a birth nobody wanted you to take and everyone wanted to own. The monastery's lay sister has labored quietly for hours. The prior believes the infant will be a lesson. The aldermen believe the mother will be a fine. The friars believe the lane will be a stage. You believe the door should be unbarred and the window latched, and 2 pairs of hands should behave as if the world is less fragile than custom. No crowd at bed denies Scripture the chance to impersonate gossip. Knife scalded cuts, linen aired holds, swaddles rinsed sings. Thanks before charges names the sisters before the prior. The prior copies your list in his own hand and tells you he forgives you for making him say thank you. You forgive him for refusing to be interesting. Krakow's leper bells ring the new order into a rumor that wants you dead and a parable that wants you sainted. You nail your list lower. Charter read aloud at St. Mary's Gate, restores law to people with buckets. Witness heard moves a rumor to a soap bowl and discovers gossip hates to be wet. Children come to tap the plank with their small fists because they want to pretend they helped. You let them because they did. The quarter-glass girl counts their jokes as minutes and says the city is old enough for this. If you ask why it sucked to be a midwife during leprosy in Krakow, begin with the basin and end with the bell. In between, count every hand that thought it could borrow your authority and send you to St. Leonard's Yard for rinsing while keeping its own gloves dry. It sucked because law prefers an address, and your door has to open to save anyone. It sucked because saints get weaponized faster than infants get named. It sucked because men who don't know the smell of swaddles can accuse you faster than fever arrives, and because you must still scald the knife and unbar the door and be polite to people measuring your worth one rumor at a time. And still, it is a good hour to keep. So here is the deal. This channel keeps. I'll keep the lane honest in your ear if you fuel the habit in your hand. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so the next hour reaches you before headlines tempt you to forget how cheap it is to be correct. Add your 7 words below. And if you want me to carry this rope into the bishop's gallery when penance rehearses, into the leprosaria courtyard when bells audition for medicine, into the alderman's tally when ink flirts with spectacle, and along the midwives' row when swaddles are accused of doctrine, say continue, and I'll bring buckets, rope, plank, quarter-glass, and enough lists to embarrass thunder into usefulness. The bishop's gallery pretends parchment can midwife, so you rope the stair from stall to rail and set the horn lamp on the ledger table until a warm coin of light lands where bucket, veil, rumor, and breath must agree, or Krakow will draft your hands into theater while mothers wait 2 rooms away. The alderman's clerk, ink shining with the self-esteem of Latin, waves a notice that smells of candle soot and fear. Suspected contact shall present herself at St. Leonard's Yard before prime with witnesses. Suspected midwives shall accept examination. Suspected households shall hang signs, confess, and pay. You do not read it aloud. You read faces. A beadle looks relieved to have something official to hold. A canon counts your fingernails as if mercy depends on cleanliness he forgot how to fund. 2 market wives share a shrug that honors yesterday's scalded knife more than today's flourish. Rope does what rope always does. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised, no crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present. The quarter-glass girl flips her sand, and the gallery is forced to keep time with a mother it cannot see. Leprosy makes brave people sentimental, and sentimental people cruel. The hermit at Kazimia's preaches from across the ditch that sin is sticky. The physician whispers near your ear that vectors are stubborn. The baker wants to help but believes talk is flour. You prescribe tasks. Wash before rumor for everyone with a tongue. Knife scalded for anyone who mentions saints before soap. Swaddles rinsed for anyone tempted to prophesy. A parish list arrives like a bundle of nettles. Names tied to adjectives by men who never fetched water. Witnessed heard unties them into nouns. The first labor of the day is small, except to the woman living through it. A soldier's wife in a lane off Grodska grips your wrist and says she feels like a kettle begging to boil. You count her breaths into minutes. Palate raised saves her from the stone's old habits. Window latched keeps draught from masquerading as doctrine. Knife scalded is the hymn you sing with your hands. Oath copied is the answer to every suspicion waiting outside the door. The child arrives as if they rehearsed. You do not let joy outrun patience. Linen aired, swaddles rinsed. The soldier cries like a man who wanted to be useful and finally is. You write 3 names into thanks before anyone thinks of collecting coin. Officials follow gossip like crows follow plows. The beadle peeks in, ready to compare your work to a sentence. He meets your basin first. He washes, almost pious. He watches you chart the minutes. He touches the plank and finds out what it feels like to be right without raising his voice. Charter reallowed returns him to the page that authorized rope, not swagger. He becomes a door that knows which hinge matters. You will remember his name when you need a doorway that chooses mercy before spectacle. You carry the lane with you to St. Leonard's Yard by habit. Examinations are kinder when they arrive with their own grammar. Sisters in gray move like women who remember epidemics that wrote less tidy lines. A leper bell sways somewhere you do not need to see. Fever first, before anyone reads. Wash before rumor, before anyone speaks. Oath copied before anyone prays on your behalf. A woman you once helped, now veiled and steadier than the law deserves, brings you a jug. They would make you a symbol, she says. Be their rule instead. You add her to thanks higher than any title. In the bishop's hall, a canon wants to classify midwives into safe and unsafe, as if infants will be comforted by categories. You classify buckets, fees displayed, taxes, admonitions, into scoured cups and lids for poor cisterns. No crowd at bed becomes your diplomatic immunity, because it protects both bodies and pride. A lady of the Candle Guild arrives with a donation wrapped in astonishment and learns that wash before coin is not an insult but a kindness that carries her gift farther than papier-mâché miracles do. She laughs, then carries 2 pails, then forgets to lecture you. You step toward the lens because this lane now shares air with your feed. If you want this rope across conversations that get loud fast, at the shop, in your group chat, around family tables, subscribe, and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so part 3 lands while your wrists still remember how to talk to wood and water. In the comments, write your 7-word birthing rule you would actually nail at mouth height. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and tell me what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to St. Leonard's Gate before Vespers. Afternoon invents emergencies, as if quiet were suspicious. The Posade writer sends word that a woman has been seen at St. Giles with a rash like a map. You go with the plank because fear never travels alone. The rash is nettles. Witness herd gathers 3 neighbors and makes them name each leaf. Wash before rumor drowns the day's best story. A child across the yard coughs in a rhythm you dislike. Fever first moves their cheeks to your stool. Palate raised pardons the floor for being so persuasive with its coolness. The child sleeps on time's side. You walk back through stalls where leprosy lives in nouns men throw after coins. Leper father, leper bride, leper milk. You turn them back into verbs. Linen aired unlearns leper milk by replacing it with dry cloth. Door unbarred unlearns leper bride by replacing it with carry water. Swaddles rinsed unlearns leper father by replacing it with hold steady. None of this makes you a saint. It merely keeps you employed in a way heaven can respect. The second labor is difficult and ordinary. Twins refusing choreography under a roof that wants to leak. The grandmother counts saints again. You count heartbeats. Rope in the yard keeps men from assembling an audience for fear. No crowd at bed is politer than any sermon. Knife scalded must be sung twice. Oath copied must be spoken at the exact moment a shadow wants to become policy. The first girl arrives loud, the second cautious. You think everything made of will and nothing made of rumor. Thanks before charges writes 6 names, including the grandmother, because loyalty to breathing is the most ancient office. An alderman's clerk requests your presence for consultation. You arrive to find a panel rehearsing your future like a mask. The physician speaks of protocols for your kind. The friar speaks of purity. The candle mistress speaks of decency. The beadle, brave as a new habit, says witness heard should come first. You agree. You lay the plank on their table. You place the basin where their fingers will have to choose. Wash before rumor changes the volume. Charter read aloud changes the grammar. Fees displayed taxes the performance into bricks for St. Leonard's stove. Someone's face softens at the price of being right. You put their name under thanks without making them watch. In late light, you are called to a house with a sign on its door, Suspect Contact. You touch the rope and feel the weight of every hinge you defended all day. Inside, a mother stares at you as if you were medicine she can afford. You are. Door unbarred is the receipt you hand back to fear. Window latched keeps the evening from joining the argument. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, palate raised, the liturgy of sanity spoken faster than rumor can pay for. A child arrives. You give the beadle the list he thinks he owns and let him walk away believing law can keep up with love. By Compline, you have washed your hands 6 times in a bowl where ink once thought it mattered more, and you still need to defend the hour against people who haven't been present for any minute of it. Rope does the talking. The quarter-glass girl flips her sand and announces that breath has not betrayed its bargain. The sisters laugh with kettles that have finally decided you are stubborn enough to partner with. The leper bells ring like men who have learned restraint. And you, midwife, neighbor, survivor, occasional diplomat, stand in the lane you tied to itself at dawn and feel the city decide not to embarrass itself tonight. You leave the horn lamp where the next call can find it without asking courage for permission. Tomorrow, they will say new things about you with old words. Tomorrow, you will hand them a basin, a plank, a rope, a list, and the quarter glass, and watch their mouths forget to be cruel while their wrists remember how cheap it is to be correct. If you want me to carry this through the bishop's gallery when penance dresses like medicine, into the leprosery courtyard when bells audition for policy, across the alderman's tally when ink rehearses thunder, and down the midwives' row when swaddles are accused of doctrine, say, continue, and subscribe, and tap the bell. We have another hour to keep and a habit to nail, where knuckles will find it before mouths remember to be wise. The leproseria courtyard thinks bells can make a diagnosis, so you rope the gate from lintel to lintel and set the horn lamp on a chipped stoop until a warm coin of light lands where basin, veil, rumor, and breath must agree, or Krakow will let pity pretend it is science and send your patients home with headlines instead of help. The bell rope dangles like a verdict. The yard smells of lie, herbs, and misfiled fear. A lay brother touches his scapular between every word. A city doctor touches his quill between none. A penitent woman touches nothing for fear of adding a stain. You nail counsel at mouth height because wrists must bruise before mouths hire thunder. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first. Wash before rumor, wash before coin, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised, no crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present. The quarter-glass girl flips her sand, and the bell, bored of being a judge, consents to keep time. A steward steps forward with the tidy confidence of someone who never lifted a basin. Suspected contact, he declares, indicating a mother who has not yet put her weight down since dawn. Sheeted penance, 3 Sundays. Witness heard seats him by the bucket and refuses to let the word suspected skip the soap. The lay brother lists meals, the neighbor lists minutes, you list pulses. The doctor begins to list causes and, seeing the basin, remembers to list water. Fever first is the grammar that defeats the rumor's best stanza. Oath copied glues everyone to their verbs. he signs without theatrics. She breathes as if the yard itself has stepped back. Leprosy's cruelty is that it recruits policy faster than compassion. Childbirth's cruelty is that it demands compassion faster than policy. You glue the two together with chores. Knife scalded becomes the yard's liturgy. Linen aired becomes its calendar. Swaddles rinsed becomes the penance that satisfies both saints and midwives. A hermit at the ditch tries to make penance an aria. No crowd at bed denies his chorus a stage. The Sisters of Warmth arrive with copper, onions, and a list that doesn't ask permission. The steward discovers that approval tastes better when it follows scald. A boy slips the gate, clutching coins, and the urgency of someone who learned secrecy from sermons. Her water's broke, he says. Wash before coin baptizes the errand. Witness heard rescues the story from its own panic. Rope borrows a team from the leper bell. Two brothers used to hauling what streets can't name, and your lane follows you into Casimir's by simple imitation. The house has a sign on it that thinks it is destiny. You touch the rope, it becomes housekeeping. Door unbarred grants permission to every mother who was waiting for a sentence. Window latched persuades the draft to stop auditioning. Pallet raised, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed. The child arrives as if time honored the list. The neighbors arrive as if guilt did. Thanks before charges prints their names in an order that makes everyone less poetic and more helpful. On Grodska, a beadle who once loved spectacles now loves schedules. He tries not to show it. The aldermen want tallies, he mutters, and the bishop wants paragraphs. You hand him your answer, fees displayed tacked to his own staff. 2 cups scoured for every complaint, 4 lids for every sheet demanded, bricks for St. Leonard's stove whenever a rumor commits the sin of being interesting. He laughs despite himself. The quarter-glass girl announces 2 minutes left to argue, and the beadle prefers to carry. He isn't wrong. A merchant's parlor hires theology to defend its furniture. The wife wants absolution for the midwife she has not yet paid. The mistress wants mercy for a child the city insists on calling evidence. The priest wants the right to finish a sentence unchallenged by kettles. Rope interrupts as if it were part of the house. Witness heard ties all 3 voices into a timeline where a basin can work. Wash before rumor starves the only speeches that threaten to ruin tomorrow's baby. No crowd at bed keeps the room from renting prophecy. Oath copied becomes a quiet ceremony. No one applauds, and everyone remembers when the child's cry masters the grammar of the hour. The midwife, your hands under another name, accepts coin only after wash before coin and thanks before charges have been read aloud like law that trusts itself. St. Mary's Lane invents a new ambush. A lectern dragged into the street by men who thought Latin could be poured like syrup on fear. You lend them your board. Charter read aloud returns power to the page that places rinsing above rhetoric. Witness heard positions a washerwoman where a cannon's elbow used to rest. The congregation, which did not show up to learn humility, discovers it loves leaving less stupid than it came. The cannon does not lose face. He saves lungs. He taps the plank with knuckles that have decided to enjoy being right more quietly. The leper bells test your dignity with a rehearsal louder than mercy. Sheet and candle, the steward suggests, gesturing toward a mother whose husband earns in charcoal and silence. Fees displayed translates costumes into cups. Thanks before charges writes names in the order that reconciles the yard with itself. The steward writes letters instead of sulks. The yard carries instead of sings. You call this a sacrament because the word behaves when it is tied to a bucket by a rope. A physician with a new cloak asks to view your knife before he agrees to sign your list, as if steel answers better than women do. Knife scalded is your conversation. Swaddles rinsed is your retort. Palate raised is your stubbornness. He knocks the plank, one knuckle, and looks surprised that he did not expire for lack of Latin. He borrows the quarter-glass girl's sand and discovers writing is easier when minutes are honest. He will still be difficult on Tuesdays. You step toward the lens because the courtyard now includes your desk. If you want more places where rinsed minutes outrun rumor, workroom, thread, kitchen, subscribe and tap the bell. The practical one, not the theatrical one. So part 4 arrives while your wrists remembered this grammar. In the comments, leave your 7-word birthing rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and tell me what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to St. Leonard's Gate. Evening finds you at St. Leonard's again, where the yard has learned to prefer lists to legends. A woman you delivered in winter arrives veiled and carrying a loaf. They wanted me to stand in white, she says, but I have bread. Bread before stories silences 3 men who were about to audition. Thinks before charges writes her name high enough for girls to notice. The bell, relieved of its former duties, rings once quietly for this private victory. The quarter-glass girl writes the minute down in her head and adds it to the pile of proofs you'll need next winter. The third call is the sort that tries to break rules by breaking your heart. A widow with hands red from a day at the vats brings you inside a room full of scapegoats. A brother-in-law who drinks discipline, a neighbor who hoards explanations, an aunt who drowns fear in saints. Rope does what rope always does. No crowd at bed makes space for work. Window latched persuades the wind to fetch wood instead of gossip. Knife scalded lights a flame your conscience respects. The child arrives with an argument for staying alive written on their face. Swaddles rinsed is justice in verbs. Thanks before charges makes witnesses into citizens. Rumor attempts to install itself at St. Mary's porch as a vending machine for absolution. You stand the sisters beside it with cups and timing. Wash before rumor empties the queue. A pilgrim shouts that leprosy should own women who touch women who touch women. Witness heard answers with the labor he did not attend. He asks you to forgive his ignorance. Wash before coin receives his apology the way buckets do, without adjectives, promptly. A bailiff drags the cucking stool across the green as if public pain will persuade the rash to recede. Fees displayed, taxes, every dunk, until the stool grows expensive enough to retire. Children cheer because they love math that wins. The beadle, now addicted to competence, tells the bailiff he needs the bench back for a righteous purpose, counting hands that carried. You let the exchange happen. The bench looks better in its new job. At Compline, you stitch a city's day into memory. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The quarter-glass sand becomes the easiest prayer. The leper bells ring like people who have decided to be specific. The sisters pile cups like evidence. You are tired the way honest economies are tired, from receipts, not regrets. And the horn lamp you leave on the nail outside a door that will need it before dawn is the only sermon you trust to survive the night without becoming vain. It sucked to be a midwife during leprosy because your door was a witness stand that people visited with poems instead of buckets, and you still had to welcome them. It sucked because law liked addresses, and you are an address, because penance hires wardrobe, because proximity to pain makes saints theatrical, because motherhood is a sentence everyone wants to edit. It sucked, and you stayed, because the knife still needed scalding, and the swaddles still needed rinsing, and the children still arrived without asking whether you were tired. That is the contract. That is the craft. If you want me to keep carrying this rope into the alderman's tally when ink auditions for thunder, into the leper courtyard when bells mistake themselves for medicine, into St. Mary's porch when sermons rent a booth, and down the midwives' row when rumor wants to write swaddles into doctrine, say continue and tap the bell. We have another hour to keep, and the habit is cheaper to maintain than to rebuild. Add your 7 words below so we can nail the best where knuckles will meet them before mouths volunteer law. The alderman's tally pretends ink can police women's minutes, so you rope the counting bench from ledger to shutter and set the horn lamp on a stack of chits until a warm coin of light lands where basin, knife, rumor, and law must agree, or Krakow will pay penance to paper while mothers bargain with breath. The clerk squares his jaw as if Latin were a plow. The beadle drags the city staff the way men drag a story they like. 2 guildmasters hover as though charges were spices to be measured by nose. You nail counsel at mouth height, because wrists must bruise before mouths rent thunder. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised, no crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present, the quarter-glass girl flips her sand, and the hall that thought it could legislate with posture is forced to keep time with kettles. They want numbers that rhyme with fear. You give them chores that rhyme with survival. Fees displayed, prices each complaint, in cups scoured, each accusation in lids for poor cisterns, each rumor in bricks for St. Leonard's stove. A guildmaster begins to object in couplets. Wash before rumor takes the rhyme out of his mouth and puts a ladle in his hand. The clerk copies a line he didn't know his wrist could afford. Spill paid. The beadle, noticing his own dignity has moved from staff to basin, stands taller, which is why you made him wash first. A bell from Casimir's interrupts the pretense of governance. You carry your rope to the ditch, where separate used to be the city's only sentence. A woman waits on the city side with her newborn, wrapped like a letter she fears nobody will read. A lay sister waits on the leper side with a loaf like an apology. The bell rope sways as if preparing to choose a side. You deny it the theater. Door unbarred at the gate, window latched on spectators, witness heard for both, oath copied on bark that will outlive today's politics. You take the child's weight for a moment so the mother can breathe without proof. The lay sister slips the loaf through, you slip back the list. Everybody pretends the exchange was ordinary. Everybody is right. Rumor tries to invoice St. Mary's porch for a miracle it didn't perform. The Candle Guild proposes a procession that would comfort the afflicted and admonish the careless. You price it. Fees displayed turns verses into lids. No crowd at bed moves the route past yards where scald does the only conversion that matters. Thanks before charges orders the names in air the way your street already learned to write them on wood. The guild mistress starts to enjoying the math more than the melody and announces, loudly enough for her rivals to hear, that buckets carry better than choruses. She will still purchase choruses. She will purchase buckets first. The next call is the one that makes both bells and books useless unless you make them behave. A girl hidden under a baker's stare has labored through shame into terror. The baker's wife has sworn to hate you and then arrived with broth. The baker tries to bargain with God in flour on his table. The priest knocks and waits, which means he has learned something. Rope domesticates the room into verbs. No crowd at bed to keep pity from burning the girl. Knife scalded for the only violence anyone will tolerate today. Linen aired, so this story will not ferment into next week's argument. swaddles rinsed to erase the stanza rumor brought to rehearsal. The infant arrives and does not know their life was litigated. Good. Thanks before charges includes the baker's wife because she carried the right thing at the right minute, and the law ought to reward that more than rhetoric. A small deputation from the leproseria arrives, hat in hand, led by the steward you have taught to mistrust adjectives. He asks for your rope for a day, to set the yard's breadth to order. You hand him the coil like a sacrament. Oath copied ties him to the minutes he asked for. Witness heard appoints 2 women from your row to watch him keep the hour and correct gently. The bell, grateful to be relieved of pretending to be a judge, rings on the quarter glass. The steward will return the rope frayed with humility. You will knot it where it learned, nail it lower, and say nothing. Krakow discovers a new vice, identifying as a witness without washing. You cure it with elegance. A sign at St. Leonard's Gate. Wash before rumor, in letters big enough for important men to pretend they read them as children. A second line in smaller script for those who need the joke. Bread before stories. Women smile and take notes for kitchens where law is enacted without signatures. Men pretend they intended to be helpful all along. You let them be right cheaply. You step toward the lens because your lane currently shares air with your screen. If you want more rooms where rinsed minutes outrun rumor, thread, shop, office, subscribe, and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so Part 5 lands while your wrists still remember this grammar. In the comments, leave a 7-word birthing rule you would actually hammer at mouth height. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred. And tell me what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to St. Leonard's Gate. The aldermen send for you again, this time with faces that have learned fatigue. They want to standardize mercy. You accept the gibbet of that sentence and build them a shelf instead. Charter read aloud keeps rope from being misquoted. Fees displayed keeps compassion from buying itself flowers. Thanks before charges keeps ledgers from becoming petty epics. You teach the clerk to write witness heard before fine assessed. He writes it once, looks scandalized by his own competence, and writes it again to confirm he wasn't deceived by wholesome vanity. He wasn't. He is simply useful now. In Kazimierz, a hermit starts a rumor about midwives and bells that can't be extinguished by logic. You drown it in verbs. Witness heard seats the hermit, the mother, the sister, the girl who saw a woman run, the baker who scalded your knife yesterday, and the lay brother who believes leprosy is a slow country, not a swift accusation. Oath copied makes them a minute, not a mob. The rumor, paid for in basins, goes home broke. The hermit learns to bless rinses before prophecy. He is not happy. You don't need him happy, you need him regular. Sometimes people accuse you because they are lonely. A widow brings you a complaint shaped like a confession. She remembers last winter and wants to audition for sainthood because living decently without a costume feels smaller. You give her work, swaddles rinsed for a girl with twins, linen aired for a mother you are hiding from a poem, door unbarred on afternoons when men rehearse pity. She discovers sainthood is merely schedule performed in public. She shows up the next morning without a complaint. You put her name under thanks, higher than any cleric's, so girls learn which role pays better. The third birth after Vespers is a breach of both position and protocol. A soldier's lover who will not name him, a priest who has learned not to ask first, a baker's boy who knocks with a face you cannot refuse, even if the city could. Rope and timing, rope and timing. No crowd at bed protects a life, not a reputation. Knife scalded gives you courage you did not possess until your hands borrowed it from heat. Swaddles rinsed answers the greatest prayer as if it were housekeeping. The infant arrives and the soldier will never know. That is not your business. Your business was that minute and the fact that you kept it. Back at the tally bench, you see the change your lane wrote on the city. A column that used to be fines is now mostly spill paid. A column that used to be admonitions is now thanks. The clerk has improved his penmanship, which is to say, he has improved his character. The beadle brings 2 lids without being asked. The alderman reads the new paragraph about washing before rumor and nods as if the Vecchi planned it all along. Let them. Survivors can be generous with credit. By Compline, you hang the horn lamp on the nail outside a house that wore the sign "Suspect Contact this morning" and wears only laundry tonight. The quarter-glass girl flips her sand and writes a small diary in her head you would trust more than the best Latin. The leper bells ring like people who have learned the shape of silence. The sisters of warmth scrub copper with the gentleness of victories that don't require witnesses. Krakow breathes evenly enough to forget names without forgetting laws. It still sucks to be a midwife while leprosy stalks metaphors ahead of bodies, but you have a basin that can embarrass a sermon, a plank that can detain an adjective, a rope that can teach ankles to be citizens, a quarter glass that can turn minutes into neighbors, and a list that names carriers before accusers. If you want me to carry this grammar into the alderman's paper mill when ink auditions for thunder, into St. Leonard's Yard when pity needs a job, along St. Mary's Lane when lanterns return to considering themselves opinions, and into the leproseria when bells want policy, say, continue, and subscribe, tap the bell, add your 7 words, so we can nail them where knuckles will meet them before mouths. Remember how cheap it is to be correct. The procession committee decides sorrow can be scheduled, so you carry the rope from the alderman's bench to St. Mary's porch and set the horn lamp on the cantor's steps until a warm coin of light lands where basin, knife, rumor, and prayer must agree, or Krakow will allow candles to prosecute midwives while mothers wait alone. The beadle drums his staff like punctuation, the clerk warms a reed, guild wives cradle lyres of sentiment. You answer with buckets. Rope squares the porch, elbows claim the interval, and the quarter-glass girl names minutes like saints, confident enough to arrive sober. Peddlers smell a market in grief and unfurl wafers of paper printed with absolutions. The Candle Guild rehearses an anthem that replaces evidence. A friar glances at your basin and remembers to dislike you. You put his hands to work. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first. Wash before rumor, wash before coin. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed. Door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised. No crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The list lands like rain. The friar knocks twice on the plank, studies his fingers, and begins rinsing as though comprehension might be contagious. St. Mary's Tower tries to supervise by pitch, but minutes obey the quarter glass, not the bell. You post a second plank where knuckles must learn humility before opinions volunteer. Mothers read the board like weather, daughters read it like permission. A guild wife objects to your lettering and then lends a bucket strong enough to change her mind. A child claps because she recognizes the sound of grown-ups keeping agreements. You do not announce a miracle, you schedule one. The procession becomes deliveries, hymn turns to soap, and grief discovers it can be useful without applause in full, ordinary daylight. The second call is the one a city remembers badly. A foreign trader's mistress labors in a rented room above a tailor who keeps receipts like confessions. His wife has already hired a priest, 2 cousins, and a roomer. Rope persuades everyone into verbs. No crowd at bed reserves oxygen for work. Knife scalded identifies courage by temperature. Window latched persuades weather to study silence. Swaddles rinsed ends 3 arguments and starts a life. The priest blesses the basin with fingers he forgot were competent. The tailor signs the plank, thanks you, and folds his dignity into usefulness that day. The aldermen return, merciful by agenda. They ask whether midwives can be sorted into safe and suspect with an ink line. You refuse politely by building furniture. You show them the new shelf at St. Leonard's, where thanks before charges plugs names into minutes like pegs into a wall. They touch the board, smudge humility, and leave better than they arrived. Afterwards, the beadle tells you he likes posting gratitude more than penalties. You say nothing and refill the basin. He washes without prompting. That is municipal poetry. He will be insufferable by Michaelmas, and extremely useful now to everyone. St. Mary's Lane holds a rehearsal for cruelty that Rope refuses to stage. Two guild men arrive with a sheet and a theory. The first claims public shame heals faster than soap. The second wants the song. You price their preferences. Fees displayed equals 3 lids, 4 jugs, 6 scoured cups, 8 loaves, and 1 pallet for St. Leonard's stove. They count, wince, and demand a shorter melody. You give them errands instead. They knock the plank, carry with respect, and discover penance looks better washed. The quarter-glass girl writes 1 private minute that outlives all their rhymes from today. The bishop's messenger produces a ribboned writ that wants your feet in the leprosaria yard every market morning, examined like knives. You accept and change the price. Witness heard must precede inspection. Oath copied must bind examiners to minutes. Wash before rumor must quiet the audience. The steward signs because buckets already replaced adjectives in his conscience. The doctor signs because he respects anyone who times him. The beadle signs because he likes his new dignity. You sign because the knife still needs scalding, and the swaddles still need rinsing, and newborns still arrive without politics or permission from heaven. A rumor sells maps. It traces imaginary journeys from a leper's hand to a child's cheek, from a midwife's palm to an alderman's blot, from a wash basin to sin. You redraw the world with verbs. Door unbarred leads to water. Window latched leads to privacy. Knife scalded leads to breath. Swaddles rinsed leads to permission. Men accustomed to confession notice how quickly this gospel prints itself across rooms. Women accustomed to buckets notice how long it took law to learn their alphabet. The lane gets quieter without becoming less brave. You write that silence into bark for winter to remember. A noble household demands a midwife who is politically invisible. You arrive with Rope, which is the opposite. The steward wants you to use the side door. Door unbarred insists that dignity enters where work does. The chaplain wants prayer aloud. No crowd at bed retires him to the bench with the ledger. The lady wants leniency should whispers bloom. Wash before rumor answers that mercy is a verb or nothing. The child arrives without scandal. The steward signs spill paid with ordinary gratitude. The chaplain knocks the plank and avoids a homily. The lady sleeps for an honest hour. Back in the tally room, ink begins admitting what breath already proved. A column that loved fines now prefers names under thanks. The clerk experiments with writing smaller and living larger. He succeeds at one before the other, and then surprises himself with both. You leave him a basin so clean he will be embarrassed to ignore it. The beadle stands longer without leaning on his staff. The alderman's mouth prepares an eloquence you cannot use. Rope spares him time. He washes, signs, carries 2 lids, and remembers which part of authority always mattered to breathing, not to speech, ever. St. Leonard's Yard receives a visitor whose authority once terrified you, a physician from abroad who pronounces with certainty and gestures like punctuation. He asks for your knife. You hand it to him hot. He asks for your list. You nail it lower. He asks what you call this discipline. You point to the plank, the basin, the quarter glass, the rope, the names under thanks. He nods, almost bowing. Complicated Latin looks older than the copper. He rinses, signs spill paid, and tells his students to begin with verbs before adjectives if they want their oaths to endure at home. A trumpet of penance tries St. Mary's steps again. This time the sheet is red. You refuse to let color buy minutes. Charter, read aloud, restores modesty to budgets. Fees displayed makes applause finance bricks. The woman chosen to be example walks instead with a bucket. The city discovers it prefers a procession of competence. A pilgrim mutters that you ruined the view. The beetle replies that rinsed cups shine brighter than candle wax. You write neither quip into bark. You record hands, lids, minutes, and the newly pleasant habit of ending the hour without spectacle for any watcher who listened. You step to the lens again, because these benches are bigger than Krakow. If you want this rope in your meeting, classroom, comment thread, project table, wherever rumor rehearses, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so part 6 arrives while your wrists remember. In the comments, leave your 7-word birthing rule: fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and add what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to St. Leonard's Gate. Minutes turn into neighbors only when elbows volunteer. Bring courage, bring patience, bring humor, and bring clean cups for company today. The 4th call is the one that corners even seasoned hams. The mother has been named suspect since Advent. The baby is late, and the father refuses to sit unless guilt is a chair. You rope the threshold. You rope your voice. No crowd at bed saves 5 kinds of breath. Knife scalded frightens one superstition peacefully. Window latched persuades wind to honor privacy. The child delays, then chooses to live. Swaddles rinsed answers 3 petitions at once. The father weeps into your basin and learns to be delicate without being false. You write his minutes into mercy for keeps. A deputation from the dyer's quarter raises an eyebrow and a question. Can charity be standardized without losing its nerve? You say yes by counting. Fees displayed in the dye yard equals lids and loaves, not poetry. Thanks before charges names apprentices who carried when masters drafted clauses. The alderman attempts to christen the practice with a phrase. You let him. Bark loves pomp. The bucket does not. When he leaves, you add 2 more names quietly, because girls recognize which lines are meant to be repeated. They learn authority is useful only when it becomes work at once, everywhere. St. Leonard's Yard experiments with gentler spectacle. Instead of sheets, they hoist basins. Instead of chance, they time rinses. Instead of fines, they enumerate gratitude. The bell rings not for punishment, but for thanks. You are accused of inventing a cult. You admit it. The worship of minutes that protect bodies. The quarter-glass girl is its deacon. The sisters of warmth are its saints. The plank is its scripture. The basin is its font. The admirers may add Latin later. For now, everyone can participate with clean hands and unspectacular kindness, which is the best kind cities remember to teach. Leprosaria rumor tries to replay itself at the market well. A merchant announces that any midwife whose hands show red must present them for inspection before accepting payment. You invert his sentence. Wash before coin becomes the inspection itself. Witness heard collects the women he presumed to judge and gives them the chair. Oath copied commits him to carry before counting. By the time he returns with lids, he has forgotten to be important. The city becomes a little more survivable in exactly the way you like, publicly, quietly, immediately. He leaves lighter, and nobody misses his previous opinions. Convenient. The fifth call reaches you with rain stitched to it. A washerwoman slipped, and the child is impatient. Rope keeps the street from turning her pain into proof. No crowd at bed gives her courage room. Knife scalded lends you steadiness. Window latched keeps weather from arguing. Swaddles rinsed persuades the world to accept the new appointment. The beadle arrives late with a staff and leaves early with a bucket. The alderman's clerk takes notes that refuse to be poetry. The mother sleeps without dreaming in Latin. You write her name where girls can read it tomorrow and feel grave. Leper bells ring once, thoughtfully, as if trying out citizenship. You loan them your grammar. 2 taps on the plank, then breath, then schedules. The steward understands what a winter of minutes invented. He copies with the humility of someone trying not to destroy luck. Thanks before charges, names cooks and laundresses out loud. The bell approves by ringing quietly. This is not piety dimmed. This is spectacle retired with honors. You find your rope returned with new knots, and you keep them as souvenirs of a yard learning adulthood. They fit the lane better than thunder ever could, fortunately. You end the tally session by letting the clerk teach you something. How to close a book without closing the door on grace. He shows you the new margin, witness heard, written before every fine. You show him the basin that makes sentences cheaper. He thanks you by signing "Spill paid" with ink he earned. The alderman sees his own name under "Thanks" and pretends not to like it. The rope thinks he will. The quarter-glass girl counts breaths while men compose gratitude. It is not art. It is better than art on useful days, which is almost every day we breathe. You step through St. Mary's shadow toward home and find the lane you nailed to sanity at dawn, still holding its line. The sisters of warmth gossip over copper, like tacticians pleased with their infantry. The beadle returns a borrowed stool in the attitude of a man who historically did not borrow. A priest waves without agenda. Children perform the 2 taps on your plank because imitation is the city's only sacrament that always works. You resist naming the moment beautiful. You call it prepared. Beauty can afford you later if you survive this hour. You usually do, stubborn friend. A final call, because evenings love irony. A household marked suspect contact wants you to midwife and testify simultaneously. Rope teaches the room which part comes first. No crowd at bed disciplines sympathy. Knife scalded disciplines fear. Swaddles rinsed disciplines imagination. The beadle watches, then signs. The clerk watches, then carries. The alderman's cousin watches, then fetches water without complaining he is important. The child arrives, and you allow yourself the smallest kindness. Bread before stories, then washing, then a sentence none of them will quote, because all of them were busy being useful, which is the proper ending here. You lean toward the lens one last time this hour and hold out the rope like a handshake. If you want fewer lectures and more rinsing where you live, feed, shop, pew, budget, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so Part 6 reaches you before abstractions rent your patience. Drop your 7-word birthing rule: fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and add your street's nickname for sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will hammer the best to St. Leonard's in the morning. Your elbows will teach the rest. We have another hour to keep. Come back, bring water. The ledger closes itself on the day's side. You hang the horn lamp where dawn can find it, and you leave the rope knotted where the city's ankles will remember. St. Leonard's bell rings once for gratitude, twice for good grammar. Your niece leans her forehead to the plank and whispers the names under thanks, as if memory were a small liturgy that keeps women breathing through law. It is. Tomorrow you will be accused of making rinsing fashionable. You will accept the charge and sentence everyone present to carry. The child from dawn sleeps, and the city keeps promises. That is why it sucked and mattered, because you were scapegoat and schedule, target and tool, suspicion and skill. The job was rude, and the hour was holy when it turned back into chores. Keep your basin low, your plank nailed, your rope honest, your quarter glass speaking, your knife singing, your swaddles clean, your door unbarred for help and latched against theater. Krakow will thank you backwards, but breathe forwards. If you want this grammar carried into Part 6, say continue, subscribe, tap the bell, and bring 7 words we can nail where wrists will remember before mouths volunteer law. The Guild Court decides mercy should be audited, so you carry the rope from the tally bench to the arch of St. Leonard's Yard and set the horn lamp on a ledger chest until a warm coin of light lands where basin, bell, rumor, and birth must agree, Or Krakow will let leper statutes prosecute midwives while mothers barter with breath. The alderman's clerk has drafted an ordinance with tidy teeth. The beadle has trained his staff to sound like punctuation. Two guild masters expect the morning to admire their minutes. You answer with buckets. Rope squares the arch, elbows claim the interval, and the quarter-glass girl names the hour as if saving lives were a craft instead of a sentiment. You nail counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths volunteer thunder. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised, no crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. The plank says present, and even the leper bells nod like people who finally enjoy being part of a plan. The ordinance wants to sort you by halo and shadow. Registered, tolerated, suspect. The clerk rehearses, as if infants will be comforted by categories. Witness heard seats him across from the lay sister who carried heat last winter, the baker's wife who learned to arrive with broth instead of rumor, the physician who confesses to liking your basin because it corrects him without applause, and the beadle who now prefers doorways to spectacles. Charter read aloud returns the page that placed rinsing over rhetoric, scalding over scolding, minutes over metaphors. He signs the margin like a man surprised to find humility legible. You go where the ordinance will be worst at being right, a signboard house, suspect contact, where a grandmother guards the threshold like a hinge that took an oath. The rope teaches the room its verbs. No crowd at bed replaces pity's costume with air. Knife scalded makes courage hot enough to be believed. Door unbarred receives the beadle before his staff remembers how to pose. Window latched convinces weather to mind itself. The child arrives with the timing that likes to humiliate eloquence. Swaddles rinsed ends the hour elegantly. Thanks before charges prints the grandmother's name above everyone's because loyalty to breathing outranks registered titles, tolerated excuses, and suspected genius. Painters circulate a woodcut that pretends to summarize you. A midwife holding a baby with one hand and a bell rope with the other. Captions rehearsing leper distance as ethics and rumor as diagnosis. You buy the block into firewood with fees displayed and hire the carver to engrave something cheaper to admire. A basin nailed low, a plank with the rule, a rope that refuses to clap, a quarter glass with sand that has never lied. The sisters of warmth pin proofs under the print, spill paid, lids delivered, cups scoured. The painter survives the conversion and becomes useful in 3 households, which is more than art usually manages in a week of policy. The hermit at the ditch tries to return the yard to theater. He wants a sheet and a candle. You price his preferences. 2 buckets, 4 lids, 6 scoured cups, 8 loaves, 1 pallet for St. Leonard's stove. He frowns into arithmetic and discovers repentance is lighter when it carries something. The bell rings once, like a sober friend. The quarter-glass girl writes a minute you can rely on when winter returns. A birth on Grodska arrives with a chorus it did not ask for, a sweetheart who learned jealousy from statutes, an aunt who learned theology from bells, a neighbor who learned importance from being early. Wash before rumor retires 3 rehearsed sentences. Witness heard steals the stage and turns it into a table. Knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, palette raised. Housekeeping that keeps poetry honest by giving it nothing to do but listen. The child comes out furious with noise and instantly forgiven. The sweetheart becomes useful without becoming invisible. The aunt loses her appetite for theater. The neighbor carries water and later pretends that was her plan. You put her name under "thanks anyway" and do not correct her story. Because alleys are not improved by eloquence alone, you step toward the lens and ask for wrists. If you want fewer lectures and more rinsing in your meetings, threads, kitchens, and budgets, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one. So Part 7 lands while your hands still remember how to talk to wood and water. In the comments, write your 7-word birthing rule you would actually hammer at mouth height: fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and tell me what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will nail the best to St. Leonard's Gate before Vespers. The ordinance discovers it likes exceptions written as chores. A brewer's courtyard requests permission to host rinses during vigils. Fees displayed grants it in jugs. A candle guild wants a hymn. Bread before stories sells them loaves. A lay brother worries your basin is becoming a sacrament. Oath copied asks if his vows include time. He laughs, chastened, and keeps the hour. The beadle arrives without ceremony, returns a borrowed stool, and washes before asking a question. You do not answer the question. You make him carry. He thanks you with his back, which is the politest form of gratitude a city receives. At St. Mary's porch, a clever priest attempts to reconcile pageantry with rinses by inventing the blessing of the basin. You permit the blessing and forbid the flourish. Charter read aloud keeps the rite short. Witness heard appoints the washerwoman as deacon for the minute. Thanks before charges prints a list that replaces applause. From the crowd's perspective, not much happens. From the street's perspective, the basin becomes normal, which is victory disguised as boredom. You leave before anyone congratulates you for being practical. You have 3 calls and a ledger to copy. A household marked suspect contact becomes the hour's exam. A magistrate's niece has labored in privacy too long. The ordinance demanded inspection. Her mother demanded discretion. The midwives demanded rope. No crowd at bed keeps the room from paying for anyone's career. Knife scalded makes the visit non-negotiable and non-theatrical. Swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, makes tenderness efficient. The child arrives, and the ordinance shrinks to its proper size. The magistrate's name appears under thanks, because he fetched wood instead of phrasing. He does not object. Good. The city is teaching him verbs. The leproseria steward returns your rope with a knot you did not teach him. The kind work invents when pride allows it. You keep the knot as a souvenir of somebody else's adulthood. He keeps your rule nailed low, wash before rumor, and reports far fewer stories and far better behavior. The bell rings with the timbre of a tool that finally enjoys work. The alderman's clerk proposes a levy for the moral improvement of midwives. You decline by offering an invoice. Spill paid, lids delivered, pallets raised, cups scoured. He pays in coin and pails. He takes home a copy of your list for his sister, who has started timing kindness at her shop door. You begin to suspect the ordinance may survive you and forgive it in advance. Rumor tries a last improvisation at St. Mary's Well. A pious lad whispers that a midwife's hand is a gate for disease, unless a priest oversees it. Witness heard gives the lad the stool. Wash before rumor gives his sentence the float it needs to dissolve. Oath copied gives the priest a minute he can love without pretending to invent it. The lad knocks the plank as if embarrassed to be living in a place that requires him to grow up in public. He will survive. You will help. The fourth call asks you to midwife and negotiate a parable at once. A laundress with a rash on her forearm, a candle mistress who has learned repentance like a hobby, a brother-in-law who thinks Latin makes him useful. Rope bans the audience. Palate raised pardons rash and reputation alike. Knife scalded prevents everyone from learning the wrong lesson. Swaddles rinsed persuades tomorrow to arrive on time. The candle mistress fetches water as if she invented humility. The brother-in-law lifts the pail without exiting the sentence you made for him. You give him credit at thanks, lower than hers, higher than his expectations. It educates everyone who reads. You finish the court session with the tool the city did not know it wanted, the board of witness heard. For every penalty the clerk copies, he must first record who carried, who rinsed, who scalded, who unbarred, who latched, who lifted. Crime does not disappear. It becomes small and local, the way tasks defeat headline weather. The beadle brings 2 names you expected and 1 you did not, his own, because he borrowed a habit he never plans to return. You refuse to say good man. You say good minutes. He glows anyway. At Compline, you hang the horn lamp where labor will find it, and you leave the rope knotted exactly where the city's ankles will remember it in the dark. The quarter-glass girl tells the plank the names under thanks until memory becomes a small liturgy you can trust without a choir. The leper bells ring once, without theater, as if acknowledging the craft of people who chose verbs when adjectives wanted to be famous. You do not rest so much as idle like a good tool, ready to be picked up without ceremony. That is the only appropriate ending a practical hour gets. If you want the last turn, closing the ledger in a way girls can inherit without asking permission, say continue, subscribe, and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, and add your 7 words below so we can nail the best where knuckles will meet them before mouths rehearse another mistake. Tomorrow, we carry the grammar into the bishop's vestry when penance auditions for medicine, back to St. Mary's when candles try to buy minutes, into the leprosaria when bells want budgets, and along the midwives' row when rumor hunts swaddles. Bring patience, buckets, and your bright elbows. The city already knows how to breathe when someone keeps the hour. The bishop's vestry decides absolution comes with an inventory. So you rope the stone from coffer to credence and set the horn lamp on the vestment chest until a warm coin of light lands where basin, bell, rumor, and birth must agree, or Krakow will let penance prosecute midwives while mothers negotiate alone. The archdeacon squints at a scroll smelling of beeswax and ambition. A canon rearranges candlesticks like chess. The beadle holds his staff well out of splash range. 2 guild wives compare charity like recipes. You answer with buckets. Rope squares the vestry. Elbows claim the interval. The quarter-glass girl names the hour, and the sisters of warmth slide a copper pan under the clerical grammar, so sentences have to rinse before they volunteer to be public. Witness heard, charter read aloud, oath copied, fever first, wash before rumor, wash before coin, knife scalded, linen aired, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, window latched, pallet raised, no crowd at bed, fees displayed, thanks before charges. You nail your counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths remember that salvation is a verb. The archdeacon tests each line with the caution of a man who wants to be better than his reputation. The beadle washes with an eagerness that makes the lamp forgive him 3 months of spectacle. The canon attempts a flourish, sees it wilt over the basin's steam, and chooses brevity. A guildwife knocks twice on the plank, looks surprised she wasn't struck by thunder, and begins to pass cups like a deacon who found the real liturgy. Penance auditions for medicine, but your basin hands out parts. A sheeted woman who was promised a crowd receives a ladle and the minutes that keep a room merciful. No crowd at bed replaces theater with oxygen. Knife scalded makes courage the temperature of work, not performance. Thanks before charges prints 3 names before hers: laundress, baker's wife, leper cook, and the vestry notices it, prefers that order once it hears it out loud. The bell in St. Mary's Tower rings once on the quarter glass, as if relieved to be done adjudicating and ready to keep time. Candles try to buy minutes. The guild mistress proposes one more white procession to purge the district of dread. You price it where everyone can see. Fees displayed turns verses into lids and errands. Bread before stories assigns the hymn a column in loaves. Wash before rumor requires the antiphon to rinse between stanzas. The procession collapses into deliveries that smell like human sense. Pilgrims who wanted to applaud find themselves carrying in a rhythm that makes them proud and useful at the same time, a novelty they may export with plausible piety. A lay sister from St. Leonard's whispers that budgets want to be commandments. You build them into furniture. Charter read aloud secures wood and soap before litanies. Thanks before charges posts, which kitchens fed which wards. The steward returns your rope with new knots learned by labor and embarrassment. You keep them as souvenirs of his adulthood. The bell in the yard rings like a person who regrets earlier career choices. A physician volunteers to time with the quarter glass and loiters afterward to ask if he may borrow your list for his students. You make him nail it lower first. The fifth call of the day wears elegance like armor. A goldsmith's house with the new ordinance pinned beside a polished door. Inside, a mother labors beneath a ceiling that has heard 20 years of victory toasts. Rope interrupts the ancestral speech. No crowd at bed keeps heirlooms from asking for a part. Window latched persuades the draft to take its theology elsewhere. Knife scalded is the only violence anyone will put their name to. Swaddles rinsed answers both grandmothers while offending neither. The goldsmith thanks you by carrying his own water down the stairs he used to ascend like punctuation. You put his name under thanks beneath 2 apprentices who carried first. He reads the order and learns what belonging feels like on paper. At St. Leonard's Gate, a line of women you have never met knocks knuckles to plank as if registering a vote. They have brought their own rules. One reads her 7 words like a charm learned in smoke and laundry. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred. The sisters hammer it next to your counsel because lanes remember what tongues forget when bells get exciting. A friar coming to supervise penance washes without prompting, discovers rinsing is the only part of his office people actually enjoy, and leaves with wet sleeves and fewer opinions. The aldermen arrive, ceremonial and sincere, to close the ledger. You refuse to stage an ending. You stage a rehearsal. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. A clerk reads the new paragraph the Veshe adopted in a rush of self-respect, wash before rumor, and pretends he always liked it. The beadle returns the staff to its hook and keeps the basin under his arm. The archdeacon signs "Spill paid," on behalf of 2 anonymous donors who found out anonymity is cheaper than pride. The bell rings once the way a tired friend says good. You step toward the lens because endings that don't recruit the future are just entertainments with nicer manners. If you want fewer lectures and more rinsing in your threads, shops, classrooms, councils, subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one. So this craft follows you past the closing credits. In the comments, give your 7-word birthing rule you would actually nail at mouth height. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred. And tell me what your street calls sermons bottled as medicine. The sisters will pin the best to St. Leonard's Gate before matins. Your elbows will do the rest. A last ambush tries to catch you sentimental. A trumpeter sets a stool on St. Mary's step and begins to improvise a legend in which a midwife's palm is a port for disease and penance the only quarantine fit for saints. Rope and basin occupy the measure between notes. Witness herd seats his audience on the curb and equips them with buckets. Wash before rumor rinses the rhyme. Oath copied compels him to carry 2 pails between the verses he keeps forgetting. He finishes breathless, applauded for what he did rather than what he sang, and leaves wondering why useful attention feels better than fame. He will learn, which is why cities are still possible. The penultimate labor is the story you refuse to let Bark rewrite later. A washerwoman branded suspect by a neighbor with a gift for adjectives. A priest who has learned to like short prayers. A beadle who knows better than to touch his staff before washing. No crowd at bed keeps kindness from becoming currency. Knife scalded keeps courage from pretending to be appetite. Swaddles rinsed keeps tomorrow honest. The child arrives and nobody tries to purchase them with a moral. The neighbor arrives with a bucket and a blush. You file both under thanks and feel rich. The final labor belongs to someone who never planned to need you. A widow who stored grief like dry kindling and now needs both arms to lift the minute away from disaster. Rope handles the people. Practice handles the rest. Window latched disciplines wind. Palate raised disciplines memory. Knife scalded disciplines your fear. Swaddles rinsed disciplines theirs. The child lives. The widow sleeps without posture for the first time since winter. The bell in the leprosaria rings once, as if to say endurance deserves better stories than punishment ever provided. You agree by leaving quietly. You return to the vestry to finish what the ordinance began, which is to say, you finish what the city chose, a ledger that confesses nothing except who helped. The clerk reads the list of names under thanks, the way a careful man reads a map he intends to trust in weather. Sisters of warmth, baker's wife, washerwomen, steward, beadle, goldsmith, 2 apprentices, the quarter-glass girl, 3 boys whose jokes learned timing, 4 girls whose wrists learned the plank, a priest who washed before speaking, a physician who learned to time, 12 mothers, 18 neighbors, One city that never said please, but finally learned to say present. Why it sucked to be a midwife during leprosy is the same reason it mattered. You were required to stand where law wanted a door, where rumor wanted a script, where bells wanted a finish, and where life wanted a minute nobody else was prepared to keep. You were a scapegoat for an illness people didn't understand, and a schedule for a kindness they kept forgetting. A target for men who like nouns, and a tool for women who prefer verbs. An address people could accuse, and a craft they couldn't replace. It sucked, because a wrong sentence travels faster than a warm basin, and because you had to carry anyway. Why it changed anything at all is because your rope taught ankles grammar, your basin embarrassed adjectives, your plank rewarded knuckles that learned to be right before mouths learned to be loud. Your quarter glass turned minutes into neighbors. Your lists named carriers before accusers. Your city learned rinses are cheaper than regrets. Your enemies learned usefulness is better than victory. Your friends learned humility survives better than spectacle. Your children learned to knock twice before asking why. Leprosy kept its cruelties, but it lost its monopoly on the hour. So you hang the horn lamp back on its nail for whoever needs it next. Crates down, rope unknotted, bench set back, board left up. The bell and the quarter glass share the same sentence without jealousy. Lantern doors lean on hinges that remember rinses by instinct. The leper bells ring like colleagues. The bishop's ledger closes with gratitude smudged on the corners. The city breathes the quieter pride of people who chose verbs over thunder and were rewarded with surviving neighbors. Before we pack the basin, I'll ask for your help in the practical way. Subscribe and tap the bell, the practical one, not the theatrical one, so this craft has a life outside this video. In the comments, write the 7 words you would nail where wrists will meet them tomorrow. Fever first, knife scalded, swaddles rinsed, door unbarred, and tell me which street or century deserves rope next. Drop your new theme title for our next 7-part build. We have rope, lids, bowls, maps, chalk, quarter glass, plank, and 1,000 receipts ready, and thunder to turn back into hinges wherever your city needs minutes more than myths.